Inexperienced Mage, Part 1. Trying to enjoy what little time he had to himself, Mark gazed at the clouds floating above him. Lately his mind had been consumed with the upcoming sale, and his nerves had been on edge. His recent 14th birthday meant he would soon find himself on the auction block, along with many of the others he had grown up with during his time at the academy. Like the others at the academy, his mother had saved enough to have him sent there to be trained in hopes that he could be sold for a high price. Mark remembered little of his family other than the fact that he had lived on a Fairside farm where, from the time he could barely walk, he was forced to work, doing whatever his small frame would allow. His mother had been upset that her firstborn was male, and therefore was unable to be the heir she wanted. In hopes of turning a profit, she had spent 2 gold 100 pieces to send him to the academy that was famous for turning out the most sought-after slaves in all of Queendom. After his sale, his mother would receive 80% of the profit, and though he didn't like the idea of making her coin, it seemed she would do quite well. Mark had heard the academy mothers talking. They expected him to be their prize at the upcoming auction. Though he was not very tall at only 5'8", he had a very muscular build. Mixed with his short blonde hair and his bright blue eyes, he was a handsome and somewhat imposing figure for someone of his age. He had done exceptionally well in all facets of his training. The mothers had pushed him much harder than most of the others, and tomorrow he would be paraded among the wealthiest matrons of the kingdom and be sold like common livestock. A normal slave sold between 2 and 10 gold, about the same price as a cheap horse, while academy slaves sold anywhere from 50 on upward to 1,000 gold. The highest price he had heard of in his years at the academy was slightly over 2,000 gold, more than enough to buy a decent-sized farm. From his limited understanding, slaves were used as a status symbol by the nobles. As children, they would buy a slave and treat them like a new toy until the next one came along. Then the slaves were either sold off or put to work depending on their skills. Mark hadn't worked very hard for the sake of his mother, who had the option of letting him stay a free man, but in the hopes of gaining a high position in a noble's home, hopefully a kind one. If he had to be a slave, he would rather be one that worked in a lady's home rather than one who worked in the fields. Mark also held on to a thin sliver of hope that he would have a chance to escape before he was branded, though from the stories he heard that was very unlikely. A dark shadow passed over him, and he found himself staring into the eyes of Mother Elsa. She was a beautiful woman, with her slender body, narrow cobalt blue eyes, and dark brown hair, if only her attitude matched her appearance. She was his least favorite of the mothers. While most of the mothers were kind and understanding, Mother Elsa was hard like forged steel and twice as cold. Mark quickly jumped to his feet and lowered his head. "Mother, how may I be of help to you?" Though he dared not look up, he could feel Mother Elsa's eyes boring into him. "Follow me. Your mother is here to check on her investment." Her tone was cold, but in it he could detect a hint of compassion as well. That was something that unnerved him far more than any knowledge of the impending visit with his mother. Mark followed Mother Elsa into the main building that stood in the center of the academy. After winding down a multitude of hallways, Mark found himself standing before the door that belonged to the matron of the academy. His body tightened and his hands began to sweat as Mother Elsa knocked on the door. The light rap of her knuckles on the solid wood door sounded like a hammer to his ears. The thought of seeing the person that had sentenced him to life of slavery so many years ago made his stomach feel as though it was tightening itself into knots. An eternity seemed to slip until the door opened and Mother Elsa ushered him inside the room. The matron visited with the academy students often and had always been nice. She would reassure them with her soft and kind voice. Her eyes had always seemed cold and calculating. "This is your son, Lady Mildred. As my reports have informed you, Mark is one of the best students we ever trained. He is an accomplished swordsman, archer, and scholar. If he brings less than 2,000 gold pieces, I would be surprised." At the matron's smoke, Mark could see his mother's eyes light up. As his mother rose from her chair, a large smile played across her face. She walked around Mark, her eyes studying him intently. Running her hand gently over his broad shoulders, her lips twisted into a thin smile. "You have made me proud, son. At first I thought you were nothing more than wasted effort, but you have proved me wrong." Mark always had been a quiet boy. There was no advantage to be gained from angering the mothers. He always held his tongue in cheek, and never caused trouble. now sitting in the same room with the woman who had abandoned him and literally sold his life away. He could no longer hold his anger. "Never call me your son." His tone was hushed, holding only the barest hint of biting edge. As soon as the words left his mouth, he felt a sharp sting as his mother slapped him hard against the back of the head. "You ungrateful little brat! I have given you a chance to make something great of yourself, and you dare talk to me like some worthless whoreson." Her words came out like a venomous tone, punctured with continuous slaps. Seeing nothing more coming from her son, and no reproach from the matron, she let out a light hump, and left the room, the little girl following quickly behind her. As soon as the two were gone, the matron politely dismissed Mother Elsa, asking her to attend to their other duties. Once inside his dorm, he looked around at the Spartan conditions that were in the majority of his world. His small bed and desk covered in books, his practice sword, and a small chest containing very few changes of clothes were all that he owned. Picking up Paradox of Logic, Mark began reading and worked through some of the mental exercises that he found rewarding until he grew tired enough to sleep. The next morning, he started with an extravagant feast for all those who would be sold at the auction. At their short word from the matron, their assignments for the day's challenges were handed out. The academy had sent out a full listing of available slaves with their overall ranks and skills to all the major buyers. Sword bouts were to be held between different stages of the auction for the bidders' entertainment. There was a sparring bout held to display the relative skills of the first 62 slaves before they were auctioned. 2 bouts were held with 21 C and D ranks, not only to display their skills but also to entertain the buyers. Lastly, the 5 A and B rank students were to commence their bouts. An electric charge could only be felt in the air as the final contestants appeared, leaving the room eerily silent until the next round of patrons began to make their way through the line of students. They passed quickly. Soon they were led from the waiting area to the dining facility for a light midday meal, where they chatted about their prospective new owners. Mark spent most of his time trying to calm his nerves, his meeting with the queen still fresh in his mind. Mark watched with disinterest as those he had known and studied for the past 8 years were sold off. They were chained and handed off to their new owners. In less than an hour, all the numbered students were sold. The patrons' energy and their emotions began to rise as the more desirable students were bought to the box. Patrons spent increasing amounts of gold to purchase the slaves of their choice. The day seemed to be passing in a blur, and Mark soon found himself standing in the arena for the bout that would start off the sale of the top students. His opponent Sarah was short, lithe, and very fast on his feet, but his attacks held little power behind them. Mark had sparred with him many times in the past and never lost to the talented knife fighter. Sarah had always considered Mark as his rival for the top position in the academy and had turned everything into a challenge to be won. Mark had only focused on his own studies and usually tried to shy away from Sarah's taunts. The battle began fiercely, with Sarah coming at Mark and quickly striking with his own 2 wooden practice blades simultaneously, coming in at different angles. Mark let out a heavy sigh as he watched the attack pattern. He had hoped Sarah wouldn't be so brash right at the onset of the fight and would allow both of them to display their strengths, but it seemed Sarah wanted to end this quickly. This was one of Sarah's main drawbacks. He always started with a flashy move. Outwardly, the move was good. With only one blade, Mark couldn't block both of Sarah's swords, but he was skilled enough to know that he didn't have to. Waiting until the last second, Mark dropped to the ground, rolling around to Sarah's right. He kicked, connecting with Sarah's chin, knocking him off balance. Wasting no time, Mark continued his whirl, coming up behind his opponent. Sarah, sensing his predicament, tried to dodge but close to the wrong side and took the full force of Mark's blow to his ribs, knocking him down. Sarah's face was scornful as he looked up at Mark and the wooden blade at his neck. Mark stretched out his hand, but Sarah knocked it aside, happening to spit at the blood on Mark's shoes instead.